Great, Ben. So do we have anybody who wants to ask a question? John Cornell.
Hi, Mary Lou, can you see me?
We can see you.
Okay. Ben, you talked about anaerobic conditions being something that the avocado tree abhors. Are there, would it make sense where you were, say, using drip irrigation with more than one line, or if you had mini sprinklers where there were more than one mini sprinkler per tree, to alternate application time so that only a portion of the tree's root system would be anaerobic at any given time?
Excellent. Yes. And that has been done in grapes and citrus. It's called alternate row irrigation. In fact, back in the old days, the good old days, when we had furrow irrigation, that's exactly what they do. They irrigate one side and then let that dry out and then irrigate the opposite side. And, you know, in furrow, where you basically completely saturate the area that's being watered, that really was valuable. But yeah, you know, if you have the facility to, irrigation parts are cheap. You know, you put in 2 valves, and what does a valve cost? $25, $30, something like that. It just takes time, and that's the thing. You've got to pay attention, and you got to go out there and walk the orchard. You know, these irrigation controllers that run on ET, and you just set it and you walk away, and you go to Florida or Las Vegas. God damn it, you just forget about it. Don't farm. You cannot automate an irrigation system. You know, you can use automation to help you, but don't let the automation take over. Anyway, so yeah, this alternate side irrigation can be very helpful.
So Ben, building on that, I just came back from Spain, and we saw a lot of growers that are converting to drip irrigation, and several of them now are moving along the lines of what John asked you, to 3 or even 4 lines per row. So what do you think about that?
Yeah, well, avocado is not anything else, and it's got a superficial, shallow root system, and it's really dependent on the wetted area. Okay, in citrus, it's got a deep root system, and as soon as a water drop hits the soil, it spreads out, right? So it's spreading out because of the soil surfaces, the soil particles. So in a sandy soil, it tends to move down. In a heavier soil, it tends to move out. So, but it's got a deep root system. So, as the water moves from the spot that it enters into the soil, it'll spread out, and it'll spread out adequately to meet the needs of a citrus root. Whereas in an avocado, it doesn't spread out fast enough to meet the architectural design of the root system. So you need to wet as much area as possible in an avocado. So yeah, the thing about drip is it's guaranteed to plug. And the more emitters you got, the more plugging you got, the better filtration you have to have, the better walking the lines you have to be. That's why we went to micro sprinklers, partly because it's hard to maintain a good drip system free of clogging, bacterial clogging, sediment clogging. Anytime a dripper clogs, you don't see it. In a micro sprinkler system, you hear when it's not working. You don't hear that in a drip, and it gets covered with leaves and you don't see it.
But,
So yeah, it's great.
That goes back to this discussion, though, that we now have, pressure regulated drippers.
Yeah.
And the fact that, like in Spain, and I've been to South Africa and in Chile, they're almost exclusively drip. They've moved away from the micro sprinklers. They're saying they get better uniformity of irrigation.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, we have that sprinkler versus drip dilemma, and what do you do?
Okay, so inherent to micro sprinklers is these are point sources of water. The old high pressure sprinklers, that are designed, the brass sprinklers they're designed for overlap, so that, if you look across and, for example, a playing field, the sprinklers, the water that's moving down through the soil is almost uniform, moving straight down, because it's designed for overlap. Micro sprinklers are not designed for overlap. And as you move away from the point of emission, there's a lot of water that comes out at where the micro sprinkler emitter is. And as you move out, the water output diminishes with distance. And what happens is that as you reduce the amount of water coming out, you accumulate salt. And if you look at the salt distribution in a micro sprinkler system, it's very low right at the emitter. And then as you go out and if you get to the margins of the wetted pattern, the salt can be so high that there's no roots capable of taking the water up. Whereas in a drip system, you tend to have a nice, even wetted volume. And you just get a small little fringe of salt that develops along the drip pattern. So yeah, drip can be much more uniform in application than a micro sprinkler. And especially when you start looking at micro sprinklers in windy areas, and you start getting all these, patterns that, the winds kick up all over the place, and then you get leaves that are in the way, you get the canopy in the way of the micro sprinkler. Drip on the ground inherently can be much more uniform as long as it's maintained. And that's the problem. We got lousy, we got people that don't walk their orchards for 10 years,
Very good. We have a question here from Julie. Julie? We can't, Julie, you have to unmute yourself, please.
There you go. I'm wondering about when you prepare the soil for planting new trees in relation to watering. I've seen the soil wetted, and so that workers can dig the small hole for the tree. But I'm wondering about the buildup of salts in that soil, which has not been irrigated. And so I'm wondering if pre-irrigation will help survival of newly planted trees in your grove.
That's a really good question. We've had a lot of flower growers, strawberry growers decide, oh, those are too labor intensive, I'm going to go to avocados. And so they've been growing stuff under tunnels, these plastic tunnels you see out there on the Oxnard Plain. And that means they get no rainfall. So they've been under these tunnels for, 5, 10, 15, 20, 30 years. No, not 30 years, but 20 years. And they've never been leached. They've never seen the sky. They've never seen rain. And, these flower, I'm picking on people, but they go out there and they, plant these trees and they die because of salt damage, because they never leached. So yeah, you want to make sure that everyone who plants, everyone who goes into a new situation should do a soil evaluation. What is the salinity? What's the texture? How much layering do you have? So yeah, you want to make sure that you've got a handle on the salinity before you plant. And if you can, get some sprinklers in there to water that down, and then move the salts through. But when you plant, the first thing you want to do is make sure you got your irrigation lines in. I've seen this time and time again where people put their trees in and then they put the irrigation in. And the first thing should be, you do all the prep, you dig the holes, and then you put the plants in. And then as the plants go into the bed, you turn the valve on that bed and get those trees going. They don't want to be sitting out there in dry soil. So you want to get them off to a good start. So Yeah, and salinity can be a real issue.
Great, Ben. I know when I was on this trip to Spain, we also went to Portugal and they were planting avocado trees and it was a windy, hot day. They have salt in the soil and they didn't have the irrigation system in. And boy, were those trees that they spent a lot of money on, they all were wilted going down the road. You could see the wilt moving across the field in relationship to when the trees were planted during the day. It was really pretty amazing. Julie, do you have any other follow-up questions?
Am I on?
Yes.
You can hear me. So, yes, so if we would be planting into an existing grove. And so what you would see with the young trees that are having salinity problems is yellowing leaves.
You know, are you talking about interplanting young trees into old trees?
Yes, sir.
Oh, don't do it. You know, little tree cannot fight against the big tree. They're fighting for light. They're fighting those root systems. You're putting it into a situation. Every avocado orchard, I don't care what orchard it is, every orchard has root rot in it. Every orchard. You know, if the avocado has been harvested at any one point, I guarantee you've got root rot. So you're putting a little tree into a difficult situation that's got chronic root rot. And I would say 50% of the time those trees are going to die. Don't do it. You know, manage the orchard as it is so that, you know, you maintain the productivity. I mean, a big tree, a mature tree can handle root rot. You know, you can, you know, shoot it full of, you know, Erondis, you can, you know, give it phos acid, you know, you can keep it going. But a little tree thrown into a situation like that, it's, you know, it's come out of the nursery, you know, you're going to waste your $40. Don't do it.
How about the fact if you've stumped the bigger trees and then you interplant with a replant? So the big trees are stumped.
You gotta, boy, you really be on top of, you gotta have a completely separate irrigation line. You know, the comment about, you know, alternate side irrigation, you gotta have a completely separate irrigation system for your young trees as well as for your old trees. The demands are different. The frequency of irrigation is different. If you don't get the irrigation right, you have dead trees.
Thanks, Julie. Curtis has his hand raised. You're muted, Curtis.
Oh, okay. I'm not now, right?
No, we can hear you.
I've been a little confused about tensiometers, readings and thresholds in clay soil versus sandy soil. I know when you buy the tensiometer, they have a little graph in there that shows you where a 50% depletion occurs in sandy soil, and it's a higher reading in clay soil than sandy soil. But on the other hand, when you think about the tree roots and you think the tensiometer is reflecting the effort the tree root has to make, you'd think that, well, it wouldn't matter whether it was clay soil or sandy soil. If a reading of 20 indicates the effort the root is making, then it should really be the same no matter what the soil type. So what is your take on that?
You answered your own question. A tensiometer is a reflection of the energy required by the root to extract water from the soil. So it does not matter. The soil is a reservoir, and that's it. You know, it's like if it's 25 centibar in a clay soil, it's, you know, it's going to be the same in a sandy soil. So a tensiometer is smarter than people. You know, people complain about tensiometers. Well, that's because they don't walk their lines. You know, oh, it's always empty. Well, that's because you let it dry out. You know, you didn't water soon enough. Tensiometers are great devices. You know, I really believe in them, but you got to pay attention. And if you pay attention to your tensiometer, you're paying attention to your trees.
You know, I have some tensiometers, and I have an orchard that's on a slope. And I have some tensiometers around citrus and some around avocados. And one thing it seems like going around with a soil tube, it seems like there's quite a bit of variability that you can, on one side of the tree, the tensiometer can be indicating it's got adequate moisture, and then you push the soil tube in just on the other side of the tree or not that far away and say equidistant from the sprinkler, and it looks much drier. So it seems like maybe I just have very irregular soil, but it seems like you kind of have to be careful with your readings on the tensiometer and, not just rely on it. It's kind of the impression I've gotten.
Yeah, that's a good point. So welcome to avocado production. I've had, people wanting to do soil studies on avocados, and I say, well, good luck. You walk 2 feet and you got completely different soil. It's just hillsides are variable. There's nothing. You start at the top, it's thin. You go to the bottom, it's thicker. You go to the east side, north side, west side. Soils are different in avocado orchards anytime you get off flat ground, but even flat ground here on the Oxnard Plain, there's a melange of soils. So the tensiometer should be within the wetted zone of the tree, between the emitter and the trunk, somewhere where the root is taking up water. You see people putting their systems out in the middle of the road because it's easier to read there. Well, that's not where the roots are, man. You put it where the roots are. And even then, this is just another tool. You have to use all your senses when you're irrigating. And with experience, you'll learn that when this tensiometer here reads 25 centibar, boom, it's time to irrigate. You got to learn where to do the measurements. So, if you're getting a different soil moisture reading with your tube on the opposite side of the tree, that water may not be getting over there. So, but yeah, it's great you're using a tube because, a tensiometer is in place. It's a fixed position. A soil tube, you can go around and get a better idea of the general requirement of a whole orchard.
It's almost like individualize the reading on each tensiometer in a sense for its specific circumstances.
Yeah, that's all it's reading is right there.
Yeah. Okay.
So,
Thanks.
Ben, how about going on to measuring soil water tension? Gypsum blocks are a little bit less expensive, and perhaps you could put out more to get a better idea. Or what would you say a grower should do? Use gypsum blocks, a lot of them, or fewer tensiometers?
That's the deal. You can get, first of all, you want to learn about your irrigation system, and you want to put two at a station that is representative, a healthy tree that's representative of the orchard, a tensiometer that goes down to 8 inches, which tells you when to irrigate, and then a tensiometer that's deeper, about 18 inches, that tells you, okay, I've irrigated enough. Okay, and you can leave that system in there for a year, get a year's idea of what's going on. But it's really valuable to have 2 depths at a representative site. And gypsum blocks, soil moisture blocks, that come from Watermark. If you want more sites, it's much cheaper. Okay. A given tensiometer will cost $75 or something like that. So a measuring site's going to cost you $150, whereas the Watermarks are going to cost you, I forget what they are, $30 now. But the voltmeter that you need is going to cost you $350. You can get these networks that will feed into, and you can get multiple sites. So yeah, if you're looking at multiple sites, the Watermarks are a much cheaper way to go. But again, they are point sources of measurement. They've got to be at a representative site for the orchard, a representative tree in the ideal optimum wetted spot of that orchard. And again, these are tools. You cannot just rely solely on them. They are informative to help you guide your irrigation practices. And in large part, it's to override your senses. It's what is day length, what is wind, what is humidity, and what is heat. You can't just go on, you as the barometer of irrigation. You've got to figure out what the tree's barometer of irrigation requirement is. And that's looking at the soil reservoir and its depletion, and actually looking at weather forecasts. And right now, CIMMYS has got a, I forget what it's called, FRET forecast, and if you go onto the CIMMYS website, they've integrated the NOAA weather forecast, so it can give you a sense of what your future irrigation practices will be.
And we're going to have we're going to have a speaker about that in one of the upcoming sessions.
Yay! Yeah.
So we had a question in the chat that I thought was sort of pertinent to what we're talking about now. If you're a grower and you have clay soil and you've done a really good job, you put mulched out, so the mulch has a whole different texture. You have the roots growing up into the mulch, but you have a heavy clay soil. How do you balance your irrigation to sort of take care of the roots that are at that interface with the mulch growing into the mulch and the clay soil?
Boy, that is a really good question. And it's hard. And this is where, you're going to have to be looking at the tree. One of the hardest thing to do is figure out how much and when to irrigate after rainfall. So we're going into March or April and there's no rain forecast. So do you run it just to keep those upper roots going? I'm going to put on, 2 hours, 4 hours, 8 hours, just a shot to keep the upper roots going, because you don't want to drown the lower roots. And especially if you've got a heavier soil below the mulch layer, it's really easy to asphyxiate those lower roots. So you're going to have to go out and just, actually take a soil tube and see how rapidly that interface, where the mulch is in the top 2 or 3 inches of the mineral soil is. And, it's a balancing act. I don't have it takes going out to do it, and every orchard's going to be different.
Do we have anybody else that has, I have a couple more questions I wrote down from the chat, but do we have anybody else who wants to ask a question?
I have another question.
Yes.
Curtis. So I've heard that gypsum is good for helping to increase pore size in clay soils.
No.
It's not?
No.
Oh, okay.
So no. Gypsum is one of these landscape myths. Calcium sulfate gypsum only works in a sodium affected soil. Okay, specifically sodium, not salts, sodium. Chloride, no. The calcium in the calcium sulfate displaces the sodium. Sodium disperses soil particles and causes soils to what we say deflocculate. Flock is French, means snowflake. So you want to create an aggregate structure in the soil. And sodium is a large molecule that prevents soil particles from sticking together. And so what you want to do is use the calcium to displace the sodium. Calcium is a small atom and it allows particles to come together. If you add gypsum to a soil, you're adding salt. You're making things worse. Don't do it unless you have the specific need to control sodium. Thank you.
Thank you. So John, you had your hand up first before Greg.
Yeah, thank you, Mary Lou. Ben, we've seen big differences between rootstocks and specific ion uptake abilities. I'm thinking of rootstocks like DUSA, which have the ability to reject chlorides. What is the mechanism involved with that, or do you know?
I don't know.
Yeah, we're gonna have a session, I think, next one, we'll have a speaker talk about salinity and rootstocks, but you're right. DUSA is, I would say, only moderate. Some of the VC rootstocks that came from Israel are much more efficient at excluding salt from the roots. So we're supposed to have a speaker next time to talk about salinity specifically on avocados.
Yeah. Rootstocks are magic. I don't understand them. It's just, DUSA does not like heavy soils. And if, people up here ask me, what rootstock should I use? And I say, oh, get Toro Canyon or Duke 7. Duke 7 is still a dynamite rootstock, especially since we use phosphorus acid. And anyway, Duke 7 is so picky about asphyxiation. And Duncan Smith farms up here on some really heavy soil. And he took me up to look at his planting, and gosh darn, the trees looks wonderful, and they're all on DUSA. And I'm going, how do you do this? And he says, well, I pump them full of phos acid, but he manages the water. He's really good at his water management. So, if you know how to manage DUSA in heavy soil, they work. But most of us, I don't know how to manage DUSA.
Greg, you have your hand up?
Yeah, thanks, Mary Lou. Hi, Ben. I'm wondering if you have any tips for scheduling irrigation on drip versus micro sprinkler related to using like a soil moisture field test. So I feel like I have a pretty good grip on when to irrigate a tree under sprinklers. But in terms of drip, since the soil volume being wetted is less, and if you do a field test just under the emitters, do you want to irrigate a little earlier? In other words, while the soil still feels a little bit wetter compared to on a sprinkler, since the soil volume being wetted is less on drip.
So what is a field test that you're talking about?
Just feeling the soil in your hand.
Oh, yeah. Okay, great. So, the thing about drip is that, as you say, you're wetting a smaller area as well as volume. So you need to sample more frequent, a larger area of the orchard to decide when to irrigate. So, and you're, again, the wetted pattern under a dripper takes a, fairly uniform pattern depending on, how variable your soil textures are. But so you want to go, get an idea of the wetted spot where the dripper is, and then move out about, you want to stay within the wetted zone, but you want to move out towards the fringe of that wetted zone. So let's say you get a spot that's 6 inches in diameter under the dripper, but when you take your soil tube and you go down, you find that it's actually moving out a foot. Well, I'd go out about 8 inches, sample out there, because the drip works because you're doing frequent small irrigations, and it is going to show depletion. The roots are going to proliferate in that wetted fringe, not so much right immediately under the dripper. They're going to be towards the edge of the fringe where there's adequate moisture and air. And so that's where you want to sample. So, usually you're looking at about 8 to 12 inches away from the actual drip point where you want to go down about 6 inches to sample.
Okay, thanks.
Russell, I see you have your hand up. You're muted, Russell, so you need to unmute yourself before you ask a question.
Sorry. How's that?
That's good. We can hear you now.
Okay. Just to continue the discussion about drippers, I wondered if we could talk about experience that people have had with expanding the number of drippers and the number of hoses. If anyone has used drip tape, I know ultimately in some situations it's advantageous for the trees to grow more row-like than total canopy, and I'm kind of toying with the idea of using drip tape to train the roots to go in a east to west orientation, so I get more sun going into the trees. Is anyone working on anything like this, or have any ideas regarding that? Starting with you, Ben or Mary.
I'd say leave it up to the audience.
Does anybody have any ideas about what Russell just asked?
Boy. So, I mean, when you use drippers, you have to use more than just a single dripper, because the amount of roots you're going to get is not large enough, right?
Well, that's true. You need to have more, and I would recommend that you need to make sure that you have pressure compensated emitters so that you have
Yeah, I
more
wouldn't
uniform
even
pressure.
fool with the old emitters. The new ones that they have now are working so much better. The PC emitters that have a diaphragm in them. I've used them for several years now, and I just very rarely have a plugged emitter. I mean, like one or two. I could count the amount of plugged emitters that I've had on one hand. But
Derek, do you have an answer for Russell? You're muted, Derek.
There we go. No answers. It's uncharted territory here, so I'm grateful for the discussion. But I can say that dripper plugging is a problem, especially as we move to inline emitters. So the external emitters are generally being left by the wayside due to expense and maintenance. So Ben's point to filtration is key to. You got to have super clean water because you don't know what's coming up, and then you cover it up with mulch. You make it a little harder to detect whether or not you're actually wetting that spot. So a lot of challenges going to drip, but we're going to give it a try. We're going to have dual systems, one for sprayers, one for drip in the new trees going in. So I've been talking this over with Ben and neighbors and whatnot. So it's going to be a challenge, but forums like this allow us to discuss that, but no answers yet. So we'll keep you apprised. These are the first non-burned. Now everybody else is putting drip on berms that I can see, and we're in sandier soils and planting flat, so a little bit different. But my question for Ben, the reason I raised my hand can you talk a little bit about the roots not growing to water? Because this is key in dripper placement. I see it a little differently in citrus, in a furrow. I mean, they wonderfully go. We have avocados that were grown on furrows. Maybe they watered a greater area, but in the old days. But I'm kind of curious and want you to follow up a little bit of that so that we can, look at how we apply our future water, either by a sprayer, sprinkler, and or in combination with drip.
So you're asking specifically, does a root grow towards water?
Yeah, and then
No, it doesn't. I studied irrigation at UC Davis, as you did, Derek, and I had this guy Del Henderson. He's a big bull of a guy, and he actually designed all the irrigation lines at UC Davis, and he just ripped a student apart when he said roots grow towards water, and and the point is, just think of the extreme. You got a root and then a mile away there's water. Is it going to grow towards that?
No.
You got a root and you got 18 feet away. Is it going to grow towards that? No. If you've got a root that is a foot away, you get diffusion of moisture, air. It's moving through those pores. And then it can start sensing moisture.
Right.
But it's got to be close enough and it's got to be replenished rapidly enough for it to sense it. You know, these are sensory, you know, beings. And so, you know, it's not going to be somewhere where it doesn't know it can be.
Yeah, so this is a really key point because it involves the moving of your dripper placement as that tree canopy increases. So, you know, pretty hard to do if you're covering it up with mulch right away. But, you know, we're starting 1.5 feet away. We've got the drippers on there. They're probably, or the sprayers watering the root ball. By the end of the summer, they'll be out a little farther, and then we should have root zone contact with our drippers, which are 1.5 to maybe 2 feet away from the main trunk. So eventually you may have to move that as the tree canopy increases, but I'll keep you posted. But that's what we did. And so it will grow with the water, but it won't grow to the water, is what I hear.
Exactly. And so, you know, again, you've got a planting hole, you've got a root zone that is kind of stunned from being planted. Usually takes at least 3 months for a root to recover from being planted. So it's not moving out into the bulk soil. So you got to have water where the roots are, because the water is not going to move. You know, it does not want to leave the bulk soil to go into that hole. So you got to have the water right there on the crown of the root, but you got to move it off before you start getting root rot or crown.
Well, yeah, it is a lot easier to move a sprayer than a whole line of drip tubing. I'll have you go that, and that's probably why the Spanish and whatnot are going with multiple lines. So I'm going to be using it a little bit differently, probably as more of a supplementary system to shoot what in high ET conditions and low ET conditions, so that you're not overwatering. You're kind of sub-irrigating during the winter cool months, just giving them a little drink, and then possibly covering more acres during these heat events that we'll be talking about in a couple of weeks. But turning your sprinklers on during a heat event doesn't really do anything, and it claws up a lot of water. So this allows me to cover 40 or 50% more acreage with the sprinklers. So that's kind of my thought. And you're giving these pre-drinks to a higher degree or higher percentage of your orchards. So experiment ongoing. I can say that avocados are much trickier, and their root mat is much different than the citrus tree that just seems to grab waters coming out of a dripper. Converting from a sprinkler or sprayer jet to a drip was pretty easy in the citrus. I don't know if I would do that. You may make a comment on avocados converting, depending on their canopy size and age.
So Ben, are you gonna make a comment, or we have 3 gypsum questions that I can
Oh my
read?
God, we're going to cover that stuff later, right?
Well, I don't know, they're here now, I think we should ask.
Go ahead. Take it away.
What would you recommend as a replacement for gypsum on high magnesium clay soils in San Luis Obispo County? Do you have a good experience with Pentacal or calcium thiosulfate in an attempt to get your calcium magnesium ratio in check?
Yeah.
Or would you recommend I think it must be CN9 instead of we don't have issues with sodium or chloride? That's the first question.
Yeah. Okay. So that's another exception to the rule. All rules need exceptions. You know, those soils up there are high magnesium. Magnesium acts very similar to sodium, and it also acts to the exclusion of calcium. And Mary Lou knows that you need a high calcium in order to have a healthy fruit. Well, a lot of growers don't care about their healthy fruit, but if you want good shelf life, you need a high calcium, and magnesium prevents good calcium uptake. And so I don't know if this is the same person that was asking earlier. several years ago about, in that case, yeah, I would put gypsum out as a source of calcium to combat the magnesium, to improve infiltration. Magnesium can cause poor infiltration, just the way sodium can, not to the same extent, but it can cause that. And oftentimes you can inject it with a calcium injector. Calcium thiosulfate is, you can't put enough on affordably, to make a difference. If you've got a magnesium issue, you got to rock and roll and get, a couple tons out there, and you're not going to afford calcium thiosulfate doing that. That's mainly a source of nutrients of calcium for the plant. So.
Sorry about my dog barking. There's an egret in the backyard. The second question is, why are we generally putting gypsum in our lemon and avocado planting holes?
I don't know. Why are you doing it? Stop it. You have a reason for doing. Calcium sulfate is a salt. You make things worse. You have to do it for a reason. What's the reason you're doing it?
Okay.
I mean, the landscape architecture people are crazy. They've got, it's a cookbook. You do this. Doesn't matter whether you're Fresno or Redding or San Diego. Don't do it unless you know what you're doing.
Okay. Is gypsum still recommended for surface application to help roots fight disease?
Yes.
There you go.
We got a yes. Very good. Let me see. Now I'm going through. We had a question about stump trees. When do you put the water back on?
When you start seeing leaves. Okay, so the tree needs leaves to transpire. If you put water onto a tree that has no leaves, you're going to create root rot conditions. If you have frost, if you have a heat condition, when you defoliate a tree, stop irrigating. Stop irrigating. Whitewash the trees to prevent sunburn damage, but don't irrigate unless you can go out there with the soil tube and it shows that it's dry.
So I have a question about the whitewashing. A grower asked me this the other day, is it better to whitewash with something like Surround or to use watered down latex paint?
Surround gets expensive. It's kind of messy, but paint is messy too. But I had the house painted and I got a 5-gallon bucket of latex paint and it costs $48. So you can water that down at least 2 to 1, maybe 4 to 1. When you whitewash, you got to make it white. It can't be gray. It's got to be white for it to be effective as a sun guard. And, that's pretty darn cheap stuff. There's, what's the other stuff? Derek, what's the, what's that lime stuff that, Pure Cal or something like that? That's cheaper than Surround.
Yeah, it is calcium carbonate.
Yeah.
And it comes in different forms. And without saying the manufacturer's, per shade is one, diffusion is another. And it's basically liquefied calcium carbonate, and it's pretty white, not as white as paint, but the paint prices have doubled. So
yeah,
that's really trying to use as little as possible.
That can, you really just, you're protecting the tree until you get a nice leaf canopy coming out again.
Mm-hmm.
And don't irrigate until you see leaves.
Great. We had another question. Are there forces other than osmotic pressure, adhesion, and cohesion that account for water movement?
Gravity, soil surfaces, salinity, wet to dry, those are the main forces that drive it.
Great. So I noticed Greg and Russell, you still have your hand raised. Do you have additional questions or?
Oh, no.
Okay, just want to make sure. That pretty much, well, maybe you have the answer to this one. I don't know the answer, Ben. Someone asked, does oil used for insect control plug up the stomates?
You know, oils, horticultural oils that we use are designed to do their job, asphyxiate the insect, and then they evaporate. And usually, you know, you can see the glisten on a tree for about 5 days or so. So, you know, if you get thorough coverage, yeah, you're going to get some clogging, but it's, you know, for a minimal amount of time.
Okay, and then we just had a question. What is the best irrigation method? Schedule, ET, plant stress, soil moisture, question mark.
All of them.
Okay, and we're going to talk about
Seriously.
scheduling
Excuse
in
me?
another session.
Yeah, you know, you cannot rely on just one method. You got to use multiple methods. You know, every one of them has a fault to it. You have a fault. And so you got to use as much as you're capable of handling. And, you know, the best thing to do is walk your orchard, you know, look at the trees. What do they look like? That tells you a lot, you know, and, you know, to walk your irrigation lines, you know, we say walk every time you irrigate. Well, there's failure. These are Tinker Toy systems and they fail every time you turn the pressure on. So you need to know it, you know, just understand what your irrigation line is doing. And when you're out there, you're looking at your trees and that tells you a lot.
Is there anything though that you can put on the irrigation line to let you know that a specific line is failing on you?
That's where a flow meter, you know, all the water coming onto an orchard, or you can actually put flow meters onto each individual irrigation block. I don't know very many people that do that, but you know, the flow meter tells you, is it putting out what is supposed to be put out in a given amount of time? If it's putting out more or less, you know, you've got a problem with the irrigation system.
So I see Greg has his hand raised.
Yeah, sorry. Feel free to push this back to a later talk, but I just had a question about the crop coefficient for avocados. I know that you, Mary Lou, did work on it a while back. I don't know if any refinement has been done lately, but my recollection is it's something like 0.86, but that depends a lot on your salinity and so forth. Just a brief, anything brief you have to say about a crop coefficient to use for avocados?
Okay, Ben, I can answer first and then you can
Go.
correct me
Yeah, go
because
for it.
I'm sure I'll make a mistake. The current crop coefficient of 0.86 evolved the following way. Back in the 1980s, the commission funded a project, an irrigation project that was done in Corona. And Jewel Meyer, who was an irrigation specialist at the time, I participated in that project. And he started off with some citrus crop coefficients. And at the end of the trial, it found out, we discovered that the one that was, quote, over irrigated was the best performer in terms of productivity and tree growth, et cetera. And then the Production Research Committee funded a second project that was done at Covey Lane, which was a grove down in around Fallbrook. And again, at the end of that project, Jewel designed the irrigation system, but Jim Oster spent a lot of time on that project going over the data, and the current crop coefficient of 0.86 is based on his analysis of that data from Covey Lane, that you needed 0.86 plus leaching if you need to leach. So leaching is not built into the crop coefficient. Leaching is over and beyond. So I'll segue over to Ben because we had another project in Ventura County, Thornhill, and I know that Ben worked with Rick Snyder on that one and came up with a crop coefficient that was sort of similar to 0.86. There was work done in Chile. They have a crop coefficient. But my understanding is that the California Avocado Commission is currently funding a project to look to see whether you need a different crop coefficient at different times, different phenological stages of the tree. So I have an opinion about that, but I'll let Ben answer first.
Yeah, we all have opinions. And you know, the thing about a crop coefficient is that it's a measure of the actual transpirational drive in the plant. Okay, so you know, if you under irrigate, it stops transpiring. So your crop coefficient goes to zero. The problem in Southern California is that we have got salt in our water, and you've got to include a leaching fraction. You've got to include the distribution uniformity of your irrigation system. And when you start adding, I'm going to add a 15% leaching fraction. I've got a 80% DU, which means I've got to put on 20% more water than is required in order to get adequate water out there. Suddenly the crop coefficient becomes less important. It is not that it's not important. It gives you a guide. It gives you how much energy is being arriving to drive water use. But you got to look at the whole darn system. And that system includes the leaching and the actual, you know, infrastructure for putting the water out. And so when you start looking at the actual water required, the irrigation coefficient may turn out to be 1.2, not 0.86. But that doesn't mean it's not important. It helps you. It's one of these tools. It helps you determine when to irrigate. Okay, that's the beauty of CIMMYS. It tells you how much energy is arriving to drive water loss, and you're going to adjust I mean, you're on the north side of the hill. She's on the south side of the hill. Okay, you're going to have different water demand. Okay, but the trend is going to be the same for both of you.
Yeah, I mean, work that was done in Australia showed that the highest evaporative demand, this work was done by Tony Wiley, was during flowering, because flowers have very thin cuticles, they transpire a lot, they lose a lot of moisture. And I got asked this question actually just last week. And my answer to them was, yeah, you know, perhaps maybe the crop coefficient during flowering is higher than the rest of the year, but what Ben alluded to, the distribution uniformity and the need for leaching probably would trump any modification of that crop coefficient. And again, the crop coefficient is part of, you know, it's another tool to guide how much water to apply. So yes, maybe this current research project will find that the crop coefficient should maybe a little bit higher when the tree is flowering or when the tree is flushing. But when you factor in distribution uniformity and leaching and other factors like that, I wonder really, is it going to change that much? I don't know. Ben may have an opinion on that one, but that was my opinion.
Yeah, we're working with hammers, not with delicate medical instruments. So walk the lines. Yeah, that's more important than, is it 0.8 or 0.82, 0.86, whatever. Yeah, get over it.
Yeah.
So we have a question from Jim.
Yes, help me understand how the tree pumps the water up. Is it the opening of the stoma that causes like a vacuum, or what are the mechanics?
The
And point
atmosphere-
is,
The atmosphere is a vacuum. It's going from a wet soil through a wet tree into a dry environment, the air. It's moving down what's called an energy gradient. And so water is being pulled along by how dry and demanding the outside environment is. It's a suction, great sucking
Okay,
sound, and then south.
I think I understand that. First thing that comes to mind is branches that are low on the tree versus branches that are high on the tree.
Yeah, right.
How does it balance it out?
Yeah, well, it's called the catenary hypothesis. So it's like a train. The molecules of water pull each other up. And so the water does move more easily through lower leaves where there's the there's less friction. Okay, so at the bottom of a tree, there's less xylem to move through. When you get to the top of the tree, that's why it's what we call the clothesline effect. Remember drying clothes on the clothesline? The margins of the sheets dry out fastest. Well, the parts of the tree that dry out fastest are those on the margin and at the top of the tree. And that's where water moves the least slowly, arrives there the least slowly to be transpired.
Since we have all these experts online, what makes a tree, say I have a line of trees, one has beautiful, huge leaves, and then one or two trees away, the leaves are small. What am I doing wrong?
Root
Do you have-
rot.
do you
What
have
did you put
seedling-
on? What hormones?
Do you have seedling rootstock or clonal rootstocks?
Say again?
Do you have seedling rootstock or clonal rootstock?
Clonal. They're all DUSA.
It could be changes in the soil. It could be a lot of things. I mean, it could be depending on how old the trees are. It could be
They're all under
gophers. It could be squirrels. You need to get out and really, I mean, I assume that you've been out looking at these trees that are non-performers, but though, maybe the irrigation line is plugged on that tree, for instance. Oh, I see my gardeners here, so I'm gonna go and close my door.
Hi, Marilu.
Thank you, thank you.
Yeah, I mean, leaf size is a real reflection of health of the tree. And so small leaves are, that's one of the first signs of underwatering. It's one of the first signs of root rot. And it's, the top is reflecting what is in the soil. So if you've got something impairing the root zone, it's going to impair the canopy. And one of the first things you see is the color of the leaf and the size of the leaf.
Yeah. Am I still on?
Yes, you.
That's it.
John Jeffen, how are you?
Yeah, I'm doing well. Yeah, I wanted to follow up on the response that Marilu provided at that, asking about clonal versus seedling, but I think the scion on those trees are not clonal either. So if the budwood came from different trees, they're liable to also show those differences because they're genetically different.
I have a question for you, John, because if you're buying house trees, yes, you can get there has been genetic drift, but if you're buying avocado trees from a nursery and they have mother trees, even though there may be genetic drift, you would expect that the mother trees of a particular nursery would stay more or less constant. So I'm not sure why you're saying they're not genetically identical if you had house trees or lamb house trees or gem trees or whatever.
I think they're genetically close, but subtle differences in specific leaf area, leaf thickness, and things like that could result in those things. I know environmental factors will play into, wouldn't you say?
We'll have to discuss this offline, I think. I think we have it's a good discussion point, but not maybe for today, but that's a good point to think about.
Yep.
So we're getting towards the end of our time. Do we have any more questions? I don't see any more questions in chat. And I want to thank Ben for the great talk. It was great to hear about soils and whatnot. And we will be, Lorena will send out a notice when the videos are on the YouTube channel and when we've sent them over to Avocado Source. And but hopefully at that time, we will also send you the actual date for the next meeting, which will most likely, after talking to John Cornell, will be the, the week after July 4th. So I don't have my calendar in front of me, but I think that it'll be sometime, I look at the calendar. We're on June 2nd. The meeting would probably be sometime after July 4th. So maybe either the end of that week or the very beginning, the week of July 10th. But we'll get that out to you, and we look forward to seeing you again in about 5 weeks.
And tune in June 15th for our. heat
That's right,
mitigation.
June 15th, to hear a panel of international experts talk about how they're dealing with stress mitigation and overhead irrigation. So thank you very much.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Bye-bye.
Good to see you, Ben.
Bye.